Ladies and gentlemen, today I welcome you to the in-depth analysis of the Italian Gambit, an opening played even by Magnus Carlsen. So today, allow me to change your chess careers forever.
So side story to the Italian Gambit is I actually achieved top 20 nationally for the first time in my life because of spamming the Italian Gambit in a tournament actually. So that is why I want to share my knowledge of the Italian Gambit with you. So of course we start off with e4 followed by e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, but instead of the usual c3, we go for d4 immediately, sacrificing a pawn. So now black can capture a pawn three ways: with a pawn, with a bishop, or with a knight. So let's first explore black taking our pawn with their pawn. We immediately play knight g5, threatening to fork their queen and their rook. So now black has three ways to defend actually. Either play knight h6, knight e5, or queen e7. Here the best move for black is knight h6. In that case, we will immediately take the pawn on f7. And if black tries to counterattack to mate us on this file, we immediately take the rook with no care. Since if black plays something like d3 to attempt to mate us, we will immediately go in for a check on h5. King will have to go somewhere, and in that case, let's say king goes here, we take their bishop. If king goes anywhere, we still take their bishop, and we'll be up 8 points of material, and I believe that you can win 8 points of material. So now let's say black doesn't counterattack and takes our knight like a gentleman. Our bishop will immediately take the knight, and the king will take back. Here we'll give the king a check to fork both the king and the bishop. So now black has a few options. If black either goes king e7 or king f6, we will give a check with the bishop to screw with the king and the queen, winning us 6 points of material. We'll be up 6 points of material in the end, I mean, and that is just purely winning. Black has a few more options. Let's say black goes king e6. It's also a poor decision since we will check on d5 with the queen, and black will be forced to either go to e7 or f6. If black goes to e7, it faces the same issue of check, and we screw with the king and the queen. But if black goes to f6, we actually have a mate in 3 with bishop g5 first, trying to screw the king and the queen, king g6. But instead of taking the queen, we check the king on f5, forcing black with one square to go, and now we give a beautiful mate, g4. So now, let's say black plays a normal move such as king g8. We give a check with the queen still. Black is forced to go to f8, and now we're able to take the bishop with the tempo since it is check. If black goes anywhere with the king, we'll immediately play queen c4 to retreat, and if they try to kick us out, we just retreat. Yeah, that's the idea behind queen c4. Now let's say if black goes to king f8, here it's only variation where we'll take the bishop immediately since it's taking this check. Black can choose to block. If they block, we immediately go to b5, not allowing black to set up a free and kettle bishop. So black will play kick us out, and we will just return with the queen to e2. And that is a pretty winning position since black's king is pretty out in the open, and we can immediately develop with something bishop f4 and knight d2 or castle pretty quickly. Okay, now let's explore another way that black can defend after knight g5. Let's say black defends with knight e5. Here we take the pawn and forking the queen and the rook again, while also being a brilliant move. So now black will be forced to either take our bishop or lose a major piece. And now we take their knight, and after king takes back, we once again go queen h5, forking the king and the bishop. Now black can defend with either g6 or move back with the king. If they move king to either e7 or f or f6, they face the same issue of getting skewered and losing the queen. But if black defends with the g5 with g6 for example, we give a check, And then after black goes anywhere, we'll take the bishop and threatening to take this pawn. So if black's only defense is queen f6, well, in that case we'll be able to take the pawn. We'll be up one pawn and we'll have a solid structure where black cannot penetrate. So now let's explore the next thing that black can do. Let's say black plays queen e7. Now here we take the pawn on f7 because now black's rook is going to be taken anyways, whatever black does. So now black will probably play queen takes e4 checking. Now we actually don't play queen e2 because after we play queen e2, after takes, the knight will jump to a5, threatening our bishop, which is the only defender of our knight. Our only move that will defend the knight is bishop d5. And now black will be playing knight f6, attacking our knight. And after our bishop moves away, the knight will take our bishop, and after we take back, they'll be able to take our knight. And now they'll be down one pawn and one knight, and that is not a really good position. So instead, in this position, we don't play queen e2, we actually play king f1. A rather interesting move, not allowing us to castle. But now, if they go knight a5, we will just be taking the rook. And after takes back, we'll be able to play queen h5 check, forking both the king and the bishop once more, and we'll be up a lot of material and we'll be winning. So now let's explore back to after d4. Let's say their knight takes, we'll be taking their pawn with our knight, and they're threatening to take their pawn on f7 and forking the queen and the rook. So now black has a few defenses of either knight h6 or queen e7. So here we'll take their pawn with our bishop and not our knight, even though if we take our knight, it actually looks pretty promising because we have an attack on their rook. They'll be taking our pawn on e4, and we will be forced to play something like king f1, because if we go queen e2, they checkmate us with queen e2. So after king e f1, our position is very terrible because they have their knight, their queen, their bishop lined up on our king, which doesn't have a lot of defenders other than our queen. So here we'll be taking with the bishop, and now black has two options: either lose their queen immediately and have to resign by taking out bishop with their queen, and after that we just take their queen. And black is a lot smart, so they either play something like king d8 or king f8. So let's start off with king d8. Here we'll be taking their knight, and if the rook takes our bishop, that's a major mistake because we can sacrifice our bishop with bishop g5. A brilliant move. So now black is either forced to take or we take, and after black takes, we'll be playing the beautiful knight f7 royal forking the king and the queen, winning us pretty much the game, as we'll be up so much material that it's pretty much game over. So now black's move after we take their knight, their knight with our bishop, is for the queen to take our knight, and black will be slightly down a lot because we can play something like bishop d5 retreating our bishop, and we'll be in a pretty good shape because we are up a pawn. And now let's explore if after we take their pawn with our bishop, they go king f8, we'll once again take their knight on g8, and the rook or the king will take back. If king takes back, we just play something like knight c4, and after the queen takes our pawn, we'll just be playing knight e3, defending, and black doesn't really have any attack since our pawn is defending our knight. And even if they play bishop b4, that's a major mistake because we can play c3, forking both the bishop and the knight, winning us the game. And that is pretty much it if they play knight takes our pawn on d4. Moving on to the next variation. after we play d4, let's say the bishop takes, this will be the most complex version because we can only take their bishop, because if now we play something like knight g5 and their knight defends after it takes, we can no longer sacrifice, because after the sacrifice we do not have a bishop can take, and we are only gonna win a pawn, which will lose our queen immediately after. So here we will be forced to play knight takes bishop, as that's the primary line, or we can castle and go into a very complex game, which I'll probably be having a whole separate line for in another video. So let's say after knight takes bishop, either pawn takes or knight takes will be viable for black, or else it'll just be down a whole bishop. So after knight takes, we have two options of either castling, or we can play f4. Now f4, let's say we play f4. If black takes, that's a major mistake, because we cannot take their knight, and we'll be having a laser on their rook and their pawn, and we'll be having a pretty good position. So now let's say black doesn't take and plays d6 as a defensive move. We will be castling here, and now black will have to play a waiting move or just retreat, because same issue, they cannot take our pawn, or else they'll lose their knight. So let's say black plays something like knight f6 as a waiting move. We will be taking f takes e, and after it takes back, we'll be playing bishop g5, double attacking and threatening after it takes. After pawn takes, so have double pawns, and that is pretty good for us because they can no longer castle on this side, or we will rampage in with a queen on something like knight on queen h5, and we'll be in a pretty good shape. So that sums the primary content up for the Italian Gambit. Now we'll be exploring a few games with the Italian Gambit being used. So the game I'm about to show you is a pretty memorable game I had earlier this year. It was in a Blitz tournament, the tournament where I achieved the rating of 1789 for the first time in my life. So let's explore it. So in this game, I started off with e4. My opponent responded to e5, knight f3, pretty standard, and now I played d4, the Italian Gambit. Now my opponent chose to take with a pawn, and I immediately hopped in with a knight on g5, and we went into a pretty standard line. I gave a check, but then my opponent went back to g8. Here I gave a check, and after king moves there, I took his bishop, and then he chose to cover with the queen. I took his queen. Now his knight takes back, and now I cancelled. And now my opponent played a pretty interesting move of g6, which was pretty questionable. I didn't really understand why he would play g6. I would have thought he would have played something like b6 to develop his bishop more. So now I responded with another pretty interesting move of b3, since I wanted to establish a pretty strong file with bishop b2 to threaten this pawn and not play rook d1, threatening the pawn immediately. My opponent didn't really defend the pawn and just played b6. I now developed my bishop, and now my opponent finally defended the pawn with c5, giving him a extremely strong pawn chain. Now I didn't really want to deal with this pawn chain later on in the game, so I played rook d1 with ideas of playing c3 to get rid, because if I played c3 immediately, he can play d3, and that would just be a massive nonsense, since I calculated that after rook there, he could have maybe played this, but I forgot to see that c4 was still a viable option, so that was pretty poor decision from me. My opponent responded with knight c6, not too sure on this either. I just wanted c3 as my idea. He took, and I took with a knight, and now my pieces are mostly developed. I have one center pawn that's developed, but he does not, so I'm in a pretty good shape. He brings his rook here, probably trying to push and storm his pawns. I went in with a knight, threatening to go here, or just rampage his position in general. He went up with his king, trying to just probably kick out my knight or something, which he couldn't. And now I played f3, a pretty passive move since I didn't know what his idea was, just to defend. He went with rook b8, and now I played rook c1. And then the game just continued on pretty normally, and I played knight h3. It was a mistake because I wanted to go to g5, give a check, and maybe win something. Because at that point of time, I believe I was on 1 minute on my clock or something. My opponent was also on pretty bad time pressure, so he just played random moves, and I just believed this was a good move. I didn't really see anything better, and now he played that to defend, so pretty standard. We traded off a few pieces. I rotated my knight to get a little more time at the clock, and now I wanted to grab this pawn by this, or maybe just go here. He moves king in, I move my rook in. Now, that was a major mistake by my opponent, actually. I think that was the turning point of the game where I saw that, oh, I was winning. He played rook c7, a massive mistake, because now I can play knight e6, which knight e6 here forks both the rook, and he cannot take, because if he takes, he will lose a rook. But in the game, he did choose to take, because it's still a knight for a rook, which is not that bad. He tried to cut off my rook, in which case I just retreated. Then I just ran out the endgame, pretty simple. A few pieces were traded off. I shuffled my rooks for a little bit of time here, and then in the end, he just got grinded out because I kept taking his pawns and keep checking. I didn't really allow his pawns to move, and I threatened to promote. So in the end, he was pretty much forced to take my pawn, so I cannot promote. And after a few trades, he promotes, and then I took his queen. Well, I would have taken his queen, but I believe in the game he resigned. So that was a game where I used the Italian Gambit. It is a pretty niche opening, pretty nice. So I hope this video gave you a new opening to play within and have massive elo climbs. Thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.